Asante sana na wasalimu mjambo. Bwana Yesu asifiwe. Ningependa tuweze kuchukua muda tushukuru Mwenyezi Mungu kwa kutupa nafasi ili siku ya leo tuweze kusanyika hapa kwa minajili ya kuabudu na kusifu jina lake. Mahali pote ulipo ningependa niwakaribishe katika njia ya kipekee ili ujisikie uko nyumbani mwa Baba. Kabla tuanze ningependa tuinamishe vichwa zetu ili tuweze kuomba. Baba yetu anayetupenda, tuaja miguuni pako tena tukiwa na wingi wa shukrani Yesu, kwa maana wewe ni baba yetu. Tunasema ni asante kwa wema na fadhili zako, asante kwa kutuneemesha mara nyingine ili tuje miguuni pako jinsi tulivyo. Tutakapoanza ibada ya jioni hii, tuombe uwepo wako pamoja nasi. Nena na wana wako kwa utukufu wa mbingu, ndilo ombi letu tukiamini katika jina la Yesu aliye mkombozi wetu. Amen. Na ningependa tuweze kufungua wimbo nambari 20. Mungu wetu yeye mwamba. Tunapokaribisha mtumishi wa Mungu anene pamoja nasi. Wimbo nambari 20. Mungu wetu yeye mwamba. Mungu wetu Mungu wetu yeye mwamba, kimbilio taabuni, msaada penye shida, ulio karibu sana. Mwamba wetu kutupumzisha, yukivuli kuburudisha, yumwongozi katika njia, kimbilio taabuni. Katika njia, kimbilio taabuni, iwayo yote yeye tu, kimbilio taabuni. Twamjua yeye mlinzi, aliye karibu sana, mwamba wetu kutupumzisha, yukivuli kuburudisha, yumwongozi katika njia, kimbilio taabuni. Mungu wetu ficho kwetu, kimbilio taabuni, siku zote uwe boma, lililo karibu sana. Mwamba wetu kutupumzisha, yukivuli kuburudisha, yumwokozi katika njia, kimbilio taabuni. Amen. Karibu.
Asante sana. Karibu na tupate ombi. Baba na Mungu, tunatoa shukrani kwa yara yote umetutendea, umetuwezesha tumekuja hapa kwa ajili ya neno lako. Mtumishi wako la makauko akisimama akikutoa ujumbe, Mungu hilo umempatia, tunamuweka mikononi mwako, aongea kutoka kinywani chako. Tunaombea wenzetu ambaye wanakuja uharakishe Tunaombea siku hii, tunaombea wiki hii, mipangilio yote iende sambamba na mapenzi yako. Tunaomba msamaha wa dhambi, jina lako litukuzwe. Tunaomba katika jina la Yesu aliye Bwana na mkombozi wetu. Thank you very much for those who are listening us. Na wale ambaye tuko hapa mmekuja, karibu sana. Tungependa sasa kumkabidhi wakati huu Embakasi ili atuwezeshe kutupeleka kipindi hii yale Mungu amempatia. Kwa hivyo mzee, karibu. It's your time.
Thank you very much, Elder, for the prayer. Thank you also, Elder Dibogo, for leading us in that song, which is talking about Lord is our rock, and the purpose for which we need to be able to live and to be able to do our day-to-day activities. I want to welcome all of us that have been able to come for this program of Wednesday Vespers. And I know that there may be some that will be able to get an opportunity to be able to view it. If at all, we will be able to come on the online platforms. When we were arranging for this week of chaplaincy, and we were talking about what is it that we need to do to be able to make this week a success, we had so many things that were coming into our minds. And part of it was that we needed to be able to have a program where we could be able to share with the brethren something on Wednesday, which is today, and also again share with the brethren something on Friday, and then again now the full program that is coming up on Friday, on Sabbath. And even as we planned, we were not very sure on who are going to be the speakers. And even those speakers that came out to be able to bring something to us were not very sure about the topics that they were about to cover. And for me, I was initially probably talking about a topic like bereavement, and because of the issues that we have been seeing in the recent past. And I remember very well that even as Pastor conducted the Thursday prayers the other week, in the online platform, since I was not able to attend in person, I was able to indicate in the online platform that we need to pray for those who are bereaving. Because bereavement is now a reality, and I'm sure that even within those of us that have been able to get an opportunity to be able to come today, there are all of us who may be able to remember either a family or who are able to remember that a relative, maybe who has died, or we may be having some situation where we are actually sad or we are in bereavement. But apart from that, I said that rather than narrow down on the aspect of bereavement, probably we look at the aspect of grief or grieving, as we may call it. Since grief covers many other aspects, and which may not necessarily be just death. So I opted now to be able to come up with a topic on grief, but then again I also said that why don't I also qualify this topic and talk about humility in grief. So our topic briefly today will be about humility in grief. And it is of course not very easy to start talking about humility while grieving. But probably as we share, we can be able to see the connection in terms of why it is important for us, even as we grieve, to be able to exhibit a sense of humility. So I looked at grief and realized that grief may be defined in many aspects, and it can be defined in many terms. But there are only two aspects that I came up with, which I thought could be relevant for us, even as we talk about this topic. And the first aspect of grief is the aspect of sorrow. That somebody who is in grief is likely to be sorrowful. The other aspect of it is that somebody who is grieving is likely to be sad. So there's the aspect of, I don't know whether to call sorrow masikitiko and to call sadness huzuni. Probably we can look at that aspect in that way. So sorrow and sadness could be as a result of loss. It could also be as a result of change in some circumstances or some situation. And there are circumstances that keep on changing. So many circumstances keep on changing. Probably something was happening well, but now it has changed. Probably you had a job previously, but right now you don't have a job. So that can actually bring you a sense of grief. But one of the things that we are very sure about, and which has never been disputed by anyone, is that one of the most, one situation that causes a lot of grief to most people, and which is common across the cultures and across the nations, is the aspect of death. So one situation that causes a lot of grief to most people is death, or bereavement, as you may call it. And there are so many Bible texts that mention the aspect of death. And I just picked two of them, which you can be able to read, just to be able to see what we are talking about. And one of them is Psalms chapter 116, verses 15. The other one is Hebrews chapter 9, verses 27. But it is, what would you be able to say? In fact, why would death be the only situation that can be able to cause a lot of grief to many people? Indeed, one philosopher once said that death is the greatest fortune in which we all share. That will be very strange. That would appear very strange, because if you are talking about death, you cannot talk about a fortune. If you are talking about a fortune is a good thing, isn't it? But death cannot be a good thing. But probably, the reason why this philosopher was talking about death as the greatest fortune in which we all share was probably because death brings us all together. It makes us all equal. Death makes us all equal. Whether we are rich, whether we are poor, whether we are young, whether we are elderly, whether we are small, whether we are big, death makes us all equal. Probably that was the concept that this philosopher was had in mind when he talked about death being the greatest fortune in which we all share. But apart from that, we realize that grieving, or kuwa na huzuni nyingi, kuwa na sadness nyingi, kuwa na sorrow nyingi, comes in very many forms. And I'm sure that all of us, every single day we come across these aspects. And the common aspects that we come across, and especially for those of us from other communities where there is a lot of, where people grieve a lot, we come across aspects of crying. When people are grieving, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of tears. And this is something that is very common. Even as a young person in the 70s, I would be able to see a lot of people crying and a lot of people doing all sorts of things as we encountered a situation of death, or as we encountered a situation of unfortunate circumstance. So there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of tears. There's also a lot of overwhelming loss of sense of loss. People will feel that they have lost so much. Imagine if you lost your father. And for some of us, like who are unfortunate maybe to lose their parents while still very young, you can imagine. You actually experience a sense of loss. You look at other people who are having their fathers, you have a look at other people who are having their parents. You don't have your parents, and you feel like these people are probably advantaged than you are. So there is a lot of sense of loss. There's also the aspect of guilt. A lot of people feel guilty when situations of grief come up, especially death. There are cases where you feel like you ought to, probably there was something that you needed to have done and you never did it. And for those of us maybe who are parents or elderly parents, probably your parent is unwell and you have been called from town that your parent is unwell. And before you probably make arrangements to go home, you find probably your parent is no more. But your parent has died. And you can imagine, if you reach there, you are likely to feel a sense of guilt, that probably you did not do what was required of you to do. Of course, it is important to say that even as you grieve, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of hostility. There are people who actually become very angry. They start lamenting and they start blaming God and they start blaming everybody for not having done whatever was required of them. There are cases where maybe your parents or even your children or even any of your persons that you know dies in hospital, for example, and you feel like the doctors have not done as much was required of them. So there's a sense of hostility. There's a sense of anger. There's a sense of bargaining. I've heard of cases where you find elderly people burying their young kids or burying younger people, people who are younger than them. Ideally, it is important, ideally they say in the ideal setting, the children are the ones who are supposed to bury their parents. But we have certain instances where parents are burying their children. Even in my place of work, I know of a young man who has died, and the parents are still alive. So some cases you hear the parents bargaining. They are saying, why wasn't it me that could have gone probably? Why this young person? There's also the aspect of depression, which is very common. A lot of the times, people want to identify with what the person who has died may have been doing. And when people do that, sometimes they now eventually accept. They come to a situation of acceptance, and eventually they realize that this person has died, and we must move on now that that has happened. But it brings a lot of sense of grief. So there are very many Bible texts that talk about the aspect of grieving, the aspect of manifestation of grieving, the aspect of tears, the aspect of crying, the aspect of hostility, the aspect of anger while grieving. And some of these are I just want to give you a few of them. Maybe you can be able to read it at a later time. One of them is Psalms chapter 42 verses 3. The other one is Psalms 38, chapter 38 verses 17. 2 Samuel chapter 18 verses 33. And Job chapter 2 verses 38. So today, as we shared, as we looked at this aspect of humility in grief, I was particularly drawn to the aspect of Lazarus. And that is where our key texts for this topic are going to come from. That is John chapter 11. Thank you, Elder. That is John chapter 11, verses 21 to 22. And the same John 11, verses 32 and 33. And let me read it from my Bible, the new, which is the Revised Standard Version. And John chapter 11, verses 21 to 22 says, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Let me again read the same chapter 11, verses 32 to 33. And it says, Then Mary, when she came where Jesus was and saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came in with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. So those are 4 sets of verses in John chapter 11, which talks about the death of Lazarus. And the death of Lazarus is a common chapter in the Bible that is normally quoted a lot of the times when it comes to issues of death, and also when it comes to issues of grieving, and also the aspect of the need for people to be, for all of us to be in humility even as we grieve. We are informed that by that chapter, if you read it, and of course we will not go through it, all of it, because we don't have a lot of time. We are informed that by that chapter, that in a certain town called Bethany, there was a certain man who was called Lazarus. And Lazarus had 2 sisters. One of them was Mary, and the other one was Martha. This Lazarus was sick. If you go further, you'll see that Lazarus was a very good friend of Jesus, and also the 2 sisters. Jesus was a very good friend of them. And Jesus would, of course, be able to visit them a lot of the times. So when Lazarus was unwell, as happens in many situations, they sent word to Jesus. I don't know how they did it, because I'm not very sure that in those days we had these mobile telephones that we have. We may probably not, we didn't have even the telegrams, but probably there were people that were moving from Bethany where this family was to where Jesus was. If you look at that chapter, it is not very clear where exactly Jesus was. But if you look at the number of days that Jesus could have taken to be able to reach the family, they may probably have been very far. I was looking at the map of that area, and I realized that Bethany was actually in Judea. Judea was like maybe talk of the district or talk of the province. Within that province of Judea, there was Jerusalem, and there was also Bethlehem. They were very close to each other. In fact, I was looking at the distances, and I saw like they could have been just about 10 kilometers apart. Maybe 10 kilometers apart, or 8 kilometers apart. They were very close. But if you look at places like Samaria and places like Galilee, where Jesus used to visit a lot of the times, they were very far. In fact, I was looking at Galilee and I was seeing like it could have been even about over 100 kilometers from Bethany. And if you look at Samaria, it could have been about 80 kilometers or so from Bethany. So it means that when Jesus was given this information, it is probable that even during those days that there were traders. Probably there were people that were moving from Bethany to other places as they traded, and they did all sorts of things. So because of that, Jesus was able to get the information that Lazarus, who was his friend, was unwell and was at the point of death. But what we are being told in that text is that Jesus did not go immediately. In fact, Jesus took another 2 days. It took another 2 days before he could be able to make a decision to go. But of course, we can be sure that he already knew what was going to happen. He already knew what was going to happen. I'm sure that we are able to identify very closely with this. The reason being that there are cases where even us, as Christians, or even us as having relatives, there are cases where we are sometimes informed that some of our relatives are unwell. It could even be your parent, that your parent is unwell, but you are not able to get time to be able to go there immediately. Probably because of work, or probably you just decide to postpone. You say, no, I'll be able to go. So when Jesus had this information that Lazarus was unwell, he stayed another 2 days, and he did not go immediately to see Lazarus. And it is very interesting because in the Bible it is mentioned that Jesus loved the family of Lazarus so much. Of course, Jesus loved all the other people, but there are cases which are singled in the Bible where that love for Jesus was more intense than for other situations. And one of them is this case of Lazarus and the sisters Martha and Mary. There are also cases, of course, you have heard of in the Bible where they talk about the disciple that Jesus loved most. Of course, you can guess that was John. So the disciples were also reluctant to return to Jerusalem. As I've said, Bethany was very near Jerusalem. So they were reluctant. The reason why they were reluctant was because there were people who had threatened to stone Jesus in Jerusalem. And because of the proximity of Bethany to Jerusalem, they were reluctant to be able to return. I'm even seeing a situation that it is possible that Jesus could even have been in Galilee or beyond Samaria. So it was a little bit far off. We are talking of a distance of about 100 kilometers or so. And I'm sure that since Jesus already knew that even if he made the journey right from the beginning, he would probably not have been able to make it in time before the death of Lazarus. Because I was trying to estimate the normal distance that we walk in any one day. And if you read that Bible text closely, you'll be seeing that where Jesus is mentioning that when you walk during the day, you are able to see where you are going. And because of that fear that the people in Jerusalem would be able to stone Jesus and the disciples, they would probably have just walked during the day and maybe slept during the night. So it is probable that it was a journey that would have taken them about 4 days or so. So Jesus took an extra 2 days. He did not go immediately. But on the second day, he was able to know that Lazarus had died. And that is when now he was telling the disciples that Lazarus is asleep. Of course, then they thought that Lazarus they thought of the normal sleep. They were not able to comprehend what Jesus was talking about. And when he mentioned to them that Lazarus has died, And he said that this is for the glory of God. So I'm seeing a situation. I initially thought that it took them 2 days to be able to reach Bethany. But that is not really the case. What is clear is that they postponed their journey of going back to Bethany by 2 days. They did not go immediately, so they started on the second day. And what is also very clear from that Bible chapter is that when they reached Bethany, Lazarus had been 4 days in the tomb. He had died and he had been buried and he had actually been 4 days in the tomb. So I was seeing a situation that if Jesus and the disciples were in a place like Galilee, where it would have taken them about 4 days, if they were doing about 20 kilometers per day, it then meant that Lazarus may not have died immediately. Jesus was informed. Probably he died on the second day. And then now Jesus now started together with the disciples and walked to Lazarus, and they walked all 4 days, reaching there on the 4th day. So by the time that Jesus reached Bethany, Lazarus was already 4 days in the tomb. So what are our key learning points? What are some of the things that we can learn from this Bible text that we have shared? One of the things that we can be able to learn from this is that the sisters were grieving. They were grieving immensely. They were grieving so much because of the loss of their brother Lazarus. We need to put this in perspective in terms of our current situation. To identify, he was able to identify with the people who are grieving. And even for us, as in present day, we keep on calling upon Jesus to be able to come close to us, even when we are in situations of discomfort or when we are in a situation of grief. So for us, as people who are in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or even for those of us who are chaplains, who have been trained as chaplains, there are some of us who have been trained as caregivers. We have been trained as people who can be able to comfort others. Well, our major duty is that we have a lot to be able to do. I was just imagining the situations that we have even within our church. We have had losses. We heard of the Nyataras. They lost their father-in-law and their father. We have heard of the Mr. Oyugi, who has lost now the mother. Those of us who are in the various places that we work, I have a colleague who have just lost a brother, a very young chap. Even for those of us who are in the various groups that we belong to, we have people who have lost brothers, we have people who have lost fathers, we have people who have lost mothers. So the aspect of loss is something that is very common with us right now. And especially from the time that COVID came in, I'm sure that we have been able to experience a lot of grieving as a result of bereavement. So our role as caregivers then becomes threefold. First of all is the aspect of ensuring that when we have aspects of grieving, because grieving is brought up by aspects of loss. Something was okay in the past, now it is not okay anymore. So we must be able to bridge the past. It means we must be able to talk about the past with the people who are bereaved or the people who are grieving, but we also must talk about living with the present. The aspect of that this person has now died, and this person is not going to come again, or the person who is sad, the situation that has now made them sad or sorrowful has happened already, and there's nothing much that you can do, but you now must live with it. If, let's say, for example, you have lost your job, or you have lost something that is precious to you, that has already happened. So we must bring that person to the present. Apart from that, we must find a way of bringing the person to the future. What happens after this? Because there's still life after what has happened. There's still life after the loss. There's still life after the grieving. And we have several Bible texts that can assist us in moving forward in our various aspects of grief. And I just want to mention them as we close this topic that we have today. One of them is the first book of Peter, chapter 5, verse 7. The other one is Philippians, chapter 4, verses 6. Psalms, chapter 55, verses 22. And Psalms 86, verses 5. the book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 17, and Job, which has a lot of aspects which have to do with the grief. Job chapter 14, verses 13 to 15. Isaiah 26, verses 19. John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29. Revelations chapter 21, verses 3 and 4. And finally, Acts 24, verses 15. So, as I was saying, that even as we grieve, we need to exhibit a lot of humility as we do that. Because our God and our Lord Jesus Christ is always with us, is always close to us, because he understands and he is able to listen to us in our grief. I want to end our discussion today, or our topic today, by again quoting a philosopher. This is Confucius, and Confucius is a philosopher that is known. Is one of the most famous Greek philosophers. So what does Confucius say about these aspects that we are talking about, and which can be able to assist us to be able to move on? Confucius says, one of the things that he says is that we should feel sorrow. He actually says that we should feel sorrow. There's nothing wrong with us feeling sorrow. There's nothing wrong with us crying. There's nothing wrong with us shedding tears. There's nothing wrong with us talking about the loss. There's nothing wrong with us talking about all these bad things that have happened. But we should not allow ourselves, even in that aspect of feeling sorrow, to sink under its oppression. So Confucius is saying that it is good for us to feel sorrowful. It is good for us to feel sorrowful for whatever has happened. But when we sink under that aspect of sorrow, then we are going to be oppressed. It means we are not going to move on. We are not going to see the value of God. We are not going to see the value of closeness. We are not going to see the value of fellowship. And so it is important for us that even as we grieve, as we have sorrow, that we do not allow sorrow and grief to oppress us. Because if we allow that, then we are going to sink. And sinking is not an option for us. Secondly, I want to share something that also Confucius talks about. And this is on humility. This is what he's talking about in humility. He says, humility is the solid foundation of all virtues. Humility is the solid foundation of all virtues. And there are so many virtues. There are so many good things. A virtue is just basically all those good aspects that we normally have. All those good character traits that we normally have. But Confucius says that humility is the solid foundation of all virtues. So it means that even as we grieve, we should always exhibit that aspect of humility. And it is, I've always wondered that, and it is very true, that grief and sorrow has a way of making people very humble. If you talk to somebody who has been grieved, then you'll be able to see the sense of humility. Sometimes it is good to also end some of these things that we talk about using personal examples. When I used to interact with my late stepmother, who died in 1997, when our son was just 3 months old. When she died, we had gone to bury a wife to one of my uncles, my only remaining uncle at that time. So we went, the burial was on 4th of December, I still remember, 4th of December 1997. And as we buried, we were all there, we all gathered there, and the next day on 5th of December, we were still there, just having lunch. As we had lunch, our stepmother was there. She was elderly at the time. And previously, our firstborn child was only 3 months. And that was the first time we were taking him home. And I remember her carrying him and really giving all those good, I think she remembered all those good things that our father used to be called with, all those names that the Vasses used to be called with. Because that our son has a name that is for our father. So he was really praising this young man and carrying. And we saw like, she was very feeble. And we were even thinking like the child was going to fall off. But then she just held on. And then the next day, as we had lunch together, all of us as a family, we were together in the room. And then she just she just swayed to the side, and she died. Just like that. And we were talking about the sense of grief. And we said we had gone to bury one of the wives to my uncles. And now the next day we had now another burial that we were doing. We had to carry her to our home, which was a little bit down. And then now the arrangement started. And those days, it is not like these days when people really you extend a burial for so long. You extend a burial for so long, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, and all that. Those days, it was just 2 days, and the burial was done. So, and I was also looking at our situation and saying, this stepmother got 12 children. But only 5 of them lived to adulthood. So already, even as we were grieving about her, I'm sure that she must have grieved so much for losing about 7 children when they were still very young. I also looked at the situation of my mom and realized that we ought to have been 9, but it's only 5 of us that ever lived to adulthood. So whenever I looked at these people and said, I was wondering, I saw they were having already they had carried a lot of sense of grief inside them. And that made them to be humble over the years. If you happen to talk to the widows, and I normally share a lot with the widows when I go home. People who have been widowed for a long time. And my mom happens to be one of those that has been widowed for now 50 years. There is a sense of humility in them. There's a sense of humility in them. It is the aspect of grief bringing humility. There are sometimes when, even when you want to do certain things in a very rough way, you would hear them saying, no. Why don't you look at it this way? So humility, it means then that grief is ultimately good for us. And it is not just death. You will be grieving. People grieve over so many things. This world is full of very sad people. People are not happy. Everyone is very sad. If you talk to people, even in the places where you work, in the places where, even in the matters, you see people are not happy. You hardly ever see people smiling, isn't it? Maybe some people try to smile when they are in church. But out there, this is a very sad world. So it means then in some sense, people already have a sense of grief. And it is for that reason that even as they grieve, we should be able to exhibit the aspect of humility. So I want to thank you, those that have been able to find time to be able to come, to be with us. This week is our chaplaincy week. I believe that we will be able to share a lot more as the week progresses. And the work of the chaplains is cut out for them. Some of us used to do this thing when even as young people, employees in the various places that we worked in, without necessarily knowing what a chaplain is all about. Kumbe, we were doing the work of chaplaincy. The work of chaplaincy is something that can be done by all of us. And we want to encourage as many people to be able to continue to join in so that we can all be able to bring all those together, those who are grieving, those who are sad, those who are sorrowful, even as they sorrow and even as they become sad, or even as they are sad, because it is normal for people to be sorrowful, let them be able to be. We bring them forth that they are able to exhibit the sense of humility, and they are able to see a sense of hope as they grieve. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I think I want us to end with a word of prayer. Maybe we can all stand. Father Almighty, we want to thank you so much for being favorable to us today. We want to thank you for all the brethren that have been able to find time to be able to come together to be able to share. This is the chaplaincy week, and we want to praise your holy name that you have been able to give us the opportunity to be able to interact together with the brethren. We know that there are those that may not have had an opportunity to come, but that they'll be able to join us together in this week as we celebrate Chaplaincy Week. The work of chaplaincy is huge. The work of the chaplain is immense. And those people who have been called to be able to do it are very few. And yet, even the ones that have been called are barely not able to do the work because the work is immense. We want to give your holy name praise that you'll be able to assist us to be able to move forward, even doing the little that we can be able to do in our various roles that we have been given. We want to thank you very much for this opportunity to be able to interact. We want to thank you very much for the aspect of giving us an opportunity to share. And we want to praise your holy name that this week will be a good one as we continue to be able to share together so that even when we meet on Sabbath, which will be the time for crowning all these activities for the week, your name will be praised and glorified. We want to pray this and even that which we have not been able to pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much.